A warm-up from the low. Welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Soups with myself, Greg Eaps Peterson, now part of the VSiN family of podcasts. We've got an excellent podcast for you. We're going to be joined in a few minutes by Tristan Freeman. He does such great work over at Bustin' Brackets. He's out there in the northeast part of the country, out there in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And we're going to be chatting with him a little bit about what we've seen last few weeks in college basketball. These guys are trying to fish around for eligibility because I do find that to be very, very interesting, to say the least. Some of the teams have been winners/losers in the transfer portal, and just what we are seeing in general with regards to some of these guys have been committing a little bit early, a little bit late. The importance of chemistry this season more so than ever before as well. So we're going to have ourselves a great chat there. And then in the final segment, I'm going to give you a recap of the news and notes that we saw in college basketball on Friday. If you do have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you do have one of two ways we offer those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at GNet_81. Keep in mind, there's naming does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way, that is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever we'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. While we did not get in any Twitter/X questions today, everything that is powered by EdgeBoost. Over at edgeboost.bet, when you utilize the promo code of Greg, G-R-E-G, you're going to be able to get a $1 match on your first deposit of up to $25. Additionally, when you use EdgeBoost, you get cashback rewards whenever you utilize it. You're able to have access to your funds 24/7, 365 on leap years 366 as well. So they do a great job of getting you all squared away there. And how about if we do get squared away, our chat with Tristan Freeman, because he does such a great job of being able to gauge this great game that we all know and love of college basketball all 12 months out of the year. And Tristan, he's really a 5-tool player when it comes to gauging college basketball. I know he's been doing a little bit of work over at Sleepers Media. He's been doing a little bit over at the Field of 68. You name it, he does it. He's based out there in the great state of Pennsylvania. And you're able to follow him on Twitter/X at hoopsnut351 altogether. And Tristan, it's always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Greg. Appreciate it.
I appreciate you, Tristan. And Tristan, I need to get your thoughts on this first things first, just because I find it absolutely ridiculous. What do we make out of these guys that are just fishing for eligibility? These guys that they used up all 4 of their normal years. They used up their COVID year. They didn't have like any sort of a medical redshirt or anything like that, but yet they're looking for like a season number 6 in, I think one case, a season number 7 of college basketball. And it just sort of makes me laugh that we've got so many of these guys that they're just at this point, I wish I could call it anything else, but they're fishing for eligibility and hoping to be able to get a prayer answered because the NCAA has just been getting their rear ends kicked in court time and time again the last few seasons.
Yeah, this is another, I would say, error on the NCAA's part, because I think, before the start of this past season, there was reports coming out that had the House settlement, been approved, that the plan was to potentially have permanent 5-year eligibility. And obviously, this is the first group of guys since COVID started where the original 4-year guys would have to leave. So if the plan was to give guys extra eligibility, then that will explain why many of them figured, hey, we'll come back, because technically, again, that 2020-2021 year doesn't count. So there's still a bunch of guys who technically would have 4 years of eligibility, even though they played 5 in real life. So I understand why they did it. I think it was a mistake from the NCAA's point to even throw it out there at all, because now everyone knows about it. And because the settlement continues to get delayed and who knows whether it'll be accepted at all, it's going to be late before they even do it. And we've already seen over 1,000, coming up to 1,000 players having committed to new teams. And it's just going to throw everything off. I doubt the current seniors are going to get an extra year, regardless of what the NCAA does in the future. But it creates, a big cloud over what could happen, because so many really good players are in the portal without eligibility. And if they do get an extra year, then all of a sudden you're going to have so many guys that can go anywhere. And most of the money's been dried up. And who knows what happens to the current eligible crop of players in the portal, because many of them might end up having to go somewhere else because they can just get over-recruited.
And I wish I could ask this question in any other way, and it's going to sound stupid the way that I ask it, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Is there any rules as to what's happening in this college basketball offseason? Because The portal cutoff dates and everything like that, I believe that they've already come and gone, and I'm still seeing more and more guys enter the transfer portal. We just laid it out. These guys are fishing for another year of eligibility. As I just refreshed verbal commits, we're up to 2,543 guys in the transfer portal, and I'm not one of those guys that's going to be out here saying that NIL is the worst thing ever and everything like that, but it certainly does feel like the Wild Wild West this offseason.
Yeah, I think NIL is the least of the issues. It's the fact that, the NCAA is viewed as a weak organization in which many judges have ruled against them. Right now, everyone feels like they can, get one over on them too. While I don't blame them, individually, it's still going to be a rough situation because until judges specifically say, hey, to everyone, no, you can't do this, we've seen a few situations before, such as the St. John's duo of Letlam last year. It's just going to be hard to have them have rules because every time they do, someone's going to try and sue their way to get something from it.
Yeah, I've been calling them this on the podcast last few days. I think that it's so right. In the courtroom, the NCAA has been the Washington Generals of it all because, man, they've been getting their rear ends kicked in time and time again. As we do have our good friend Tristan Freeman, who does amazing work over at Bustin' Brackets, joining me right here on Coast to Coast Soups. And Tristan, there's been a lot made out of the transfers that we have been seeing. As I mentioned, 2,543 guys in the transfer portal, but how much do you want to be taking a look at it? Said these guys are transferring. The teams are actually bringing back guys because I think that these are the teams that are really winning in the offseason right now because I just take a look at the numbers that we've got. There are more guys that are in the transfer portal rather than guys actually returning to their respective schools. I think that these teams are able to keep things together. These teams that are able to keep a little bit of chemistry, they're going to lend themselves to have more value this year than perhaps ever before with so much movement.
And we've seen this past season with teams like Arkansas or Kansas State or USC, where so many new faces have just caused the chemistry to take a lot longer to get going. And for some teams, they never find it, and they're out of the postseason mix by the time February gets here. But while teams, like the Houston that doesn't lose players or Marquette, they're ready to, come out running and they get themselves a big advantage. And I think you're going to see some of that next year as well. And it's something to watch, whichever teams and programs can sort of get, continuity and sort of get the chemistry and everyone's roles, working, they're going to be the ones that get it to work. Or if you're the SEC, just have more talent than everyone, just blitz them out the gate. It still matters having more talent than others, but in some cases you still want to have clear roles in order to win.
Yep, and you mentioned the talent disparity out there in the SEC. I think more specifically, the amount of money to be able to bring in that talent as well. And just from everything that you've been able to see this offseason and everything that has been happening, are there a few teams that might be starting to gain up on the SEC a little bit? Because the SEC certainly has had the deepest pockets. They've been able to utilize a lot of that football money, and that has been able to translate to basketball. But I do think that it's interesting to see how these teams are allocating their funds. A school like Washington, who they gave it all to Great Osborne and nobody else last offseason. I feel like they've been able to learn from that, but I feel like it has been interesting to be able to gauge the transfer portal, and there have been a few schools like High Point, I think is a good example of this, to where there have been some of these mid-majors that have stepped up to the plate and have really stuck a lot into trying to be able to get their rosters as good as possible for this upcoming season.
Yeah, I think one conference that the new revenue sharing has benefited is the A10 because they don't have football to deal with. So basketball can be the main priority. We've seen obviously VCU and Dayton are going to have good resources, but George Washington is one of the big winners of the offseason so far. Brings back Rafael Castro, brings back several of the guards. It added some good transfers as well, and they're going to be a preseason contender to watch. And other teams has done well also. So while SEC will always have money, and I think half the league can probably spend 8 to 10 million on rosters. Other conferences can be just as competitive, and ultimately there's still only 12 spots realistically for teams to have, and everyone's going to look for a hole. But I don't think the SEC is necessarily going to hoard as many great players as they were in the past year.
Yep, I'm right there with you. I think that is such a good point that you bring up with the Atlantic 10. George Mason, George Washington have been able to have some nice ads here in the offseason. That leads me to this as well. How much do you think that everything is going to be benefiting the Big East as well? Because as we know, you just mentioned it with the Atlantic 10, they don't have to deal with football, and for the Big East. You've got a lot of schools like Creighton, Marquette, what have you, that they don't have to deal with this as well. And one of the teams I've been very impressed with their offseason as well is Xavier and everything that they've been able to do under the younger of the Patinos.
Yeah, the Big East had a few coaching changes when you include Villanova as well. They're still going to get plenty of talent. Obviously, Creighton, St. John's, and UConn probably the best three coaching situations, along with Marquette. They've been just fine, but Butler's been able to add pieces. Georgetown as well, Providence too. I think overall, I think they're in a solid position. We'll see how it works because I do wonder how many high level all league kind of guys are being brought in, but I do think at least compared to the other conferences, they should be a little more competitive collectively.
Yep, I'm right there with you. As joining me on the show, we do have Tristan Freeman. He does such great work over at Boston Brackets. Joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, Tristan, one of the big offseason moves that we saw last offseason is that there was just a big premium that was on big men the last offseason with guys like Great Spore and company getting paid as much as they were. How much do you take a look at this offseason and perhaps a little bit of a paradigm shift? Because we saw a lot of the teams that they spent a lot of money on this big men. It really didn't pan out for them, albeit in the case of Washington, it was more or less, in my opinion, a case of you paid one guy and absolutely nobody else. But how much do you think that there's more of a shift into being able to bring in that star guard rather than the star forward this offseason? Because we saw the teams that were able to make a deep run in the NCAA tournament, all of them not named Duke, who had a guy by the name of Cooper Flagg that is not going to be playing college basketball this season. A lot of them were just built around great guard play.
Yeah, but at the same time, they also had quality front courts. I mean, Houston had JoJo Tugler, the big whole defensive player of the year. Obviously, Duke had, future first round picks, and Auburn had great depth as well. I mean, North Carolina was a team of what happens where if you don't get the front court right, it severely limits your ceiling. We're already seeing a lot of bigs, entering the market, some getting over $1 million to play, even though they're not averaging much. You still need a quality rim protector. If you don't have that, your defense suffers, your team suffers as well. So bigs are still going to be important. Obviously, you're going to need the key guards, but I do think a balanced lineup is going to be important considering all the talent that's left this offseason, where including a lot of great guards, where I do think that there won't necessarily be as many elite ball handlers as there was this past season because all the COVID guys like Walter Clayton are gone now.
Yeah, but I think that that's such a good point that you do make as well. And how much do you think that there's going to be a little bit more of a shift towards actually taking a look at these high school guys and doing good recruiting on that front? Because you did mention it, the COVID guys are going to be gone, so that means that there's going to be fewer guys with experience. They're going to be out there in the transfer portal, and I think especially for these mid-major teams that they might not have the pockets to be able to throw out there a big sum of money to be able to bring in a star transfer. I do think that the high school ranks can be honestly a place where they start to thrive, where it used to be all these power conference teams, all these teams that were in the bigger conferences, they were always able to get those big recruits. And do you think that it could be a case where the mid-majors start to step to the plate a little bit more and make a little bit more of a imprint with regards to being able to bring in some of these top 150, top 200 recruits?
Yeah, I think Louisiana was able to bring in a top 60 guys. And I think some of the younger players are realizing, hey, it's better to go somewhere where you're going to get a lot of minutes, put up a lot of big points, and enter the portal, then risk getting 5 or 6 minutes and then ultimately having to transfer down, which is what we're seeing a lot of players do. I think for mid-majors, you're going to get a lot of players who didn't get a lot of minutes and know that they do have to transfer down. And if you get the right ones, I think Murray State's a good example of that, getting a lot of former top 100 prospects to join, then it could work out very well. Or there are also just some guys who weren't very good to begin with and still have that top 100 placement next to them, and it sort of hurts both them and the teams that they ultimately pick up.
Yep, I think that that's such a great point, and obviously we're probably not going to see quite as much of it for the class of 2025, but class of 2026, 27, and beyond, that's something that I'm very much watching for as well. And Tristan, as we know, there's a lot of guys in the transfer portal and trying to be like, oh, which one or two teams has won the transfer portal thus far? That's just a defeatist effort at this point. But are there a few schools that in general that you take a look at and you feel like they deserve a little bit more love than what they deserve? They don't necessarily need to be the air quotes your biggest winners or anything like that, but are there just a few schools that you look at what they've been able to do with regards to portal and you just like the way that they're building themselves up, whether that be with a coaching change or whether that be via a few transfers that they've got coming in?
Yeah, I think a lot of people look at the St. John's players and getting these shooters, such as Sonon of Arizona State and Ian Jackson. Those were big ones as well. I think St. John's won't have any issues shooting. And I also just think, a team like Louisville getting proven guys, because there's going to be a lot of mid-major stars that come up and they potentially struggle. But to get Ryan Conwell, who led Xavier in scoring, getting Isaac McNeely, who led Virginia in scoring, both guys also shot 40% from deep. Those are going to be guys where you have no question about whether or not it'll work out. So I'm definitely a fan of their recruiting classes, transfer class as well. And I think, after what happened this past season, I don't think that they'll take much of a drop off at all.
I'm right there with you. I like all those classes that you mentioned, and obviously Michigan doing a nice job bringing in the likes of Yaxel Lendeborg and company. They're a team that really stands out to me, and what stands out to me this time of year is the great work that you're putting in, Tristan, because you're just like myself. You're looking at this game of college basketball all 12 months out of the year, doing an amazing job of looking at what we're going to be getting this offseason, because when it comes to the college basketball season of 2025-26, those rosters, those title winners, they are being built right now, and I know that you're doing a great job covering this and so much more. So love to get people at home know what's all on tap for you and how people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
Yeah, you can follow me at Hoopsnut351 on Twitter/X, and we're still diving into the transfer portal and the NBA results as all the teams just continue to build out their rosters.
Absolutely, and Tristan is doing such an incredible job of taking a look at this and so much more. So big thanks to Tristan for joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, part of the VSiN Family Podcast. And coming up next, it is that time of the podcast to give you a recap of the news and notes that we saw in college basketball over the last 24 hours. And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. It is always great to be able to get Tristan Freeman aboard, who does such amazing work over at Butts and Brackets. Taking a look at this great game that we all know and love of college basketball. Every single time he joins me, he lends such great insights. Did so once again today, so a big thanks to Tristan for joining me in the last segment. Now it is that time of the podcast. I give you a recap of the news and notes that we saw in college basketball over the last 24 hours. UNLV just continues to add dudes as Miles Shea, he is now going to be heading on over to UNLV. He is a part of a locked and loaded team where I don't see necessarily that go-to scorer, that guy that is really going to light you up from three-point range other than Al Green. But I mean, you want to talk about a very well-rounded team. They're bringing in Howie Fleming Jr., who's been in college basketball for seemingly 500 years. He was over at UT Rio Grande Valley. But Dre Gibbs-Lawhorn is going to be able to give you something at the point guard spot. For Che, he was very good over at UC Irvine this past season as he was logging about 12 points, just under 3 assists per contest, and is going to be able to give you quite a bit of something from the outside. Shoots 43% from three-point range. Again, do I think that he's going to be necessarily that go-to scorer? No, but when you've got guys like a Dre Gibbs-Lawhorn, I know that they had just brought in Kamani Hamilton coming on over from High Point as well. Things are really starting around into form for UNLV, so absolutely love what they are bringing to the table. I have to love what this team is bringing to the table as well. Chattanooga is going to be bringing in Teddy Washington Jr. He completely transformed Southeast Missouri State this past season. Began his career over at Texas A&M Corpus Christi. 14 points, 5.5 boards, 2.5 assists, low to mid 33-point shooter, but was able to generate 2 steals per game, and that's big because the one kryptonite that you had for Chattanooga last season was the fact that, let's call it what it is, they weren't necessarily the world's greatest offensive team. They needed a little bit more prowess there. They've always had really good shooting, but being able to add a guy like this that is able to guard multiple positions, a guy that is able to have good versatility, he's going to be playing very well off of Billy Smith, who he comes over from Bellarmine. He's a 40+% three-point shooter. Brandon Watkins was a part of that North Dakota State team that was one of the best three-point shooting teams in all of college basketball. You needed to balance that out with a little bit of defense. They're going to be doing so. I think that that is a tremendous add for them, and I think that this is a solid add for this team as well as the rich. Just keep on getting richer. St. John's, they're going to be bringing in Dylan Darling, who began his career over at Washington State, was unable to get out there on the floor in that first year there, but he was over at Idaho State this last season, 19 points, 5.5 assists, 1.7 steals per contest. Now, the question is, how is his game going to be able to translate to the Big East, and how is he going to be taking the coaching of Slick Rick Pitino? Because for St. John's, this is going to be a very, very competitive roster. They've got Bryce Hopkins coming in. Ian Jackson is that off-the-ball scorer. He appears to be Mr. Darling, one of the guys that's in line for a lot of point guard responsibilities, because up until they added him, you didn't necessarily have that one trigger man, but you bring in Dylan Mitchell as well. St. John's, it looks like they're going to be very well-rounded. We'll see how things are going to be looking in terms of that point guard spot. And for Dylan Darling, I don't know if he could be the point guard of like a top 10 team or something like that, but he's a guy that certainly can be able to create offense for himself. He's able to get others involved as well. I really like what I saw from him last season, so that is a very nice pickup, and I do think that this is a pretty rock-solid pickup as well. As you've got Corey Cotton, who's going to be heading on over to UT Rio Grande Valley. Grand Valley really sticking a lot more into their NIL collective, a lot more into college basketball in general, as they're getting a guy in Cotton who was over at Jacksonville State this last season, averaged 7.5 points, a little bit over a steal per contest, and he's a 6'6" do-it-all sort of player, was a double-figure scorer over at VMI a few seasons ago as well, and I think that this is just a good ad for them in general. Now, for Grand Valley, their three-point shooting went right down the toilet bowl when Hassan Abdul-Hakim did go out with an injury a season ago. So that's something that they're going to need to address a little bit more. Cotton, not necessarily a guy that's going to be like a complete microwave scorer or anything like that. That's up for UT Rio Grande Valley. They're getting some good ads. They've done a nice job over the last few seasons of utilizing the transfer portal to their advantage. So I do like this move for them, and I do think that this is going to be able to elevate them a little bit more moving forward. You've got a guy that I like in Nana Njoku, who just wasn't able to get a lot of playing time in general while he was over at Villanova. He's going to be heading on over to Delaware. Delaware has done a really good job of being able to find these guys that they were at the power conference level and they were, for lack of a better term, underutilized, and they find a way to be able to do a good job of being able to really rehabilitate them, for lack of a better term. We saw that with a guy like a John Camden this last season, who couldn't get out there on the floor when he was over at Virginia Tech, and now they're going to be looking to do so with a guy that at 6'9" is not going to go out there and light you up from three-point range or anything like that, but I think that he's going to be able to play relatively well in this offense. You've got a guy in Justin Fernandez who comes on over from Providence. Again, one of those guys that he began his career over at George Mason, was in the Big East for a very long time. They've got Calvin Riley back in the fold. They're going to need to get a little bit more because they do lose Camden in the offseason as well, but I do like this pickup for them, and I do like this pickup as well. Gavin Griffiths, he was over at Nebraska this last season. Just didn't play a ton over there at Nebraska, only about 2 points per contest. He really made a little bit more hay when he was over at Rutgers. When he was at Rutgers, he was averaging about 6 points per contest, gave you a few boards. This is not someone that's going to be going out there and is going to be shooting like 40+% from three-point range, unless if there's a massive reversal in his game during the offseason. But that said, this is someone that was a top 50 recruit when he was coming out of high school a few seasons ago, a 6'8", do-it-all sort of player, and a guy that I think that Temple really needs, because Temple was very lackluster with regards to their defense this past season, and for this Temple unit, they were able to do a nice job of being able to find some good offense, and I do think that Adam Fisher, who he was able to do some great work under Micah Shrewsbury over at Penn State a few seasons ago, he's realizing, all right, we need to find a little bit more defense, we need to round into form a little bit more with that regard, and you can see that with the way that Temple has been approaching the transfer portal thus far, and I do think that this is going to be the first of many, many moves to be able to help out that, shall we say, defensive approach that Temple is going to be looking to take this upcoming season, and I do think that this is going to be one that works out very well for them, and I do think that this move is going to be able to work out as well. Jaden Epps, he's going to be going on over to Mississippi State. For Mississippi State, what they have been lacking for a very long time is three-point shooting, and Jaden Epps, he's able to give you some rock-solid offense. This past year was a little bit of a down year from about 13 points, a steal and a half per game, and you can tell that Georgetown was taking a little bit more of a defense-oriented approach, as that's a big reason why his numbers fell, because 2 seasons ago when he was over at Georgetown, he was giving the team more like 18.5 points per game. Now, has never been the most amazing three-point shooter this past year, shot 34.5% from distance, but Mississippi State will gladly take 34.5% from three-point range, guy that's able to generate some turnovers, and he himself went from averaging 3.4 turnovers per game as a sophomore at Georgetown 2 years ago to 1.8 this season, so he's been able to revamp his game, began his career over at Illinois. I do like this move for them, and I do think that that is one that is going to be paying off for a Mississippi State team that they're going to be just looking to get a little bit more in terms of that outside shooting. I think that this one is going to be a good ad as well. South Carolina, they're bringing in Norden Kopic. He was over at San Diego this last season, over at UC San Diego. He was able to log about 10.5 points, 5 boards, a little bit over an assist per contest. Now, if South Carolina's looking for this guy to become Murray Boyles 2.0, well, I've got some bad news. That is not going to be the case for them, but that said, this is a South Carolina team that they just need to be able to find reliability in the front court, and they've done a very good job here in the transfer portal, in my opinion, bringing in a Kobe Knox from South Florida, who's able to give you some three-point shooting, a little bit of versatility. Versatility is the name of the game for Mongolian Mike, who comes on over from Utah. Elijah Strong was solid over at Boston College. Do you have necessarily that go-to guy? I don't know, but Michi Johnson showed 2 years ago that he was rock solid over at South Carolina. Last year had a down year over at Ohio State, but he clearly knows the system. Kopic can be a nice guy that comes in off the bench, and if South Carolina's looking to play with a little bit more depth, play with like an 8-9 man rotation, I think that they're doing a good job of setting themselves up for success there. BYU is one of those teams in which the rich just keep on getting richer. Their recruiting class is one of the best in all of college basketball, and now they're bringing in Kennard Davis, who he's over at Southern Illinois this past season, 16 points per contest, shot 38% from three-point, 2.5 assists, 1.3 steals per contest. Now, for BYU, I don't know how many minutes he's going to be seeing, because if BYU is having him play a lot of minutes, that means that one or two of the guys that they're bringing in by the transfer portal as freshmen, what have you, they just flop a Rooney. But that said, this is a BYU team that has done a really good job of hitting the transfer portal. They've done a really good job in terms of being able to bring in these international men of mystery as well. I absolutely love what they're doing, and they've already got Robert Wright III, who they paid like $100 billion to as well. So, I mean, if he's playing over Robert Wright, that's probably not necessarily the world's greatest thing for him, because both of these guys are used to having the ball in their hands. But all in all, I take a look at what BYU has, and I do think that this is going to be rock solid for them. And speaking of BYU, you had Elijah Crawford, who he was over there at BYU this past season, just was really unable to get out there on the floor. He's heading to UIC. So you've got one team out there in the Missouri Valley that loses a guy to BYU and another that adds one in UIC. And UIC doing a really good job of just being able to stack guys here in the offseason. I look at this UIC team, and I think that they could be very dangerous out there in the Missouri Valley Conference, because you bring in Crawford, you've got Josiah Hammonds, who is a nice shooter over at Sam Houston State. This last year, Abdul Mamoa, one of the better Northeast Conference defenders in all of college basketball, 6'7" big man that's able to give you some blocks. You bring in Mekhi Lowry, a part of that rock-solid Towson defense. Antti Beljan is a 6'8", little bit of a combo player coming in from Little Rock. Really like the moves that are being made right now. So that I thought was a rock-solid one. You've got Elmar Atlison. He was a 6'8" combo player while over at Bradley last season, so we're going to stick with the Missouri Valley Conference theme, and he has decided that he is going to be heading to Miami of Ohio. This very much fits what Miami of Ohio is looking to do. Miami of Ohio, a team that is really looking to light you up from three-point. Atlison at 6'8", shot a little bit over 38% from three-point this past season, and for Miami of Ohio, it's been a little bit slow going for them in the transfer portal thus far, but being able to get an ad like this, I think that is very much going to be able to elevate them. They're going to need to bring in a little bit more, but that said, I think that is a good starting spot when you got a guy with that sort of versatility and that sort of three-point shooting ability. I do think that is going to be good for them, and I think that this one is pretty rock solid, as well as you've got Alden Applewhite. He last season was over at Murray State, averaged about 6 points, 3.5 rebounds per game. He was over at Portland for a few seasons as well, was able to up his three-point shooting, and he last year was able to shoot just below 38.5% from three-point. He has decided that he is going to be going to Georgia Southern, and for Georgia Southern, this team was really lacking any sort of defense. They didn't necessarily have a lot of outside shooting. It was a team that was a bit of a wreck, to say the least. They didn't have a lot of rebounding, and Applewhite is able to give you just a little bit of everything. He's not going to be a guy that completely transformed the ACL. He's not going to be some sort of double-figure scorer, but I think they could step in right away, be able to give this team some good production, and you've already got Tyron Moore, who's going to be looking to give you more, coming on over from UAB. Georgia Southern, you have to figure that they're not done in the transfer portal, but this is a good starting spot for them to be able to get some ability in there. You've got CJ Anthony, who's going to be heading on over from Cincinnati, and he's going to be committing to Iona. Guy that just wasn't able to see a lot of minutes over at Cincinnati, but you know what? This is an Iona program that's looking to turn over a new leaf. They went the NBA route with regards to their coaching hire, and for this Iona bunch, they are very much looking to be able to add some explosiveness. They're going to be taking a few shots on guys that maybe they didn't see a lot of minutes at the Power Conference level, but they believe that they can give them something that guys out there in the Metro Atlantic just typically are not able to, and we will see how this Iona roster is able to come to the forefront as they've still got a lot of work to do. They bring back Luke Jungers, who I like him as a 6'9" guy that's able to pop it from three. Matt Reed was pretty rock solid over at Tulsa as well, so I do think that they're probably going to be adding a little bit more shooting, but bringing in a guy like a CJ Anthony, I do like where they're heading over there. Terrence Arnoux, he's heading on over to NC State. This man was a part of a national title run over at Houston this last season. Now, he didn't necessarily have like the most prolific numbers in the world or anything like that. He was registering about 6.5 points per contest, added in there about a steal per game, but I mean, you know what? This is a very good ad for an NC State team that over the last 48 or so hours for NC State, things have been going very, very well for them as Will Wade is right now attacking the transfer portal. He's attacking it hard, and you knew that he would be able to do that as Jerry Dang is also going to be going to NC State. He was at Florida State this past season, a 6'9" big man that was able to give you 7 points, only about 2 rebounds per game. He was over at Hampton a few seasons ago where he was averaging more like 4 boards per contest. So I do have to question NC State with regards what they're going to be able to get out of Dang. I don't think that he's going to be a guy that comes in and is necessarily lighting the world on fire. And if he's seeing meaningful minutes for NC State, things have probably went wrong for NC State. But that said, with the ads that they've been able to get over the last 48 or so hours, that really does fortify them moving forward. And for this NC State team, I do like the fact that they have been very aggressive here, being able to bring in Kadir Copeland, Allen Breed, along with Will Wade from McNeese. They've got Trey Holloman who's coming in as well. I really like the Arnoux pickup as well. So overall, some very good ads for NC State. They're starting to be able to build a little bit more depth. Have to wonder if they can get 1 or 2 more guys from McNeese to be able to come in. I think that would be very important for them, but oh no, I do like where things are heading for them. You've got a guy that I think is very interesting in Devin Askew, who last season was over at Long Beach State and put up good numbers. This is a former top 50 recruit of Kentucky way, way back in the day. Averaged 19 points, 4.5 boards, 4.5 assists, shots in the mid-30s from three-point range. Was a walking turnover, but that said, he's going to be heading on over to Villanova, and I think that Kevin Willard is going to be able to get the most out of him. We saw what he was able to do this last season over at Maryland, the way that he was able to transform that backcourt, and Villanova. How about the guys that they've got coming in? They bring in Bryce Lindsey, a nice double-figure scorer over at James Madison this past season. Duke Brennan was a rock-solid big man over at Grand Canyon. Zion Stanford, I like what he was able to bring to the table over at Temple. I do think that for Villanova, they're not going to be the crab five that we saw over at Maryland this last season. I do think that they're going to be having a little bit more depth, and you would hope that they would have a little bit more depth, but that said, I do think that that's a good pickup for them. I like this pickup as well. Jared Valencia, 2 seasons ago as a 6'9" combo player over at Monmouth, was able to shoot 40+% from 3. Saw a little bit of drop in that this season, but still was able to give his bunch in Monmouth a little bit over a block, 6.5 points per game. He has decided that he is going to go to Wichita State. Now, what form of Valencia's three-point shooting are you going to get? The guy that was able to shoot 40+% from 3 2 seasons ago, or the guy that this last year, well, he didn't necessarily shoot it well from 3-point range at Wichita State. Their system is very much built around good, solid 3-point shooting, but I really like the ads that they've had. Will Berg is coming over from Purdue. He's going to be rock solid for them. And Karan Boyd, he comes on over from ETSU. He's a guy that's able to give you some solid rebounding. He's able to do a nice job of just being able to help this team out down low. They were able to add some 3-point shooting with Keenan Giles coming on over from UNC Greensboro as well. So I do like what this team is doing overall, and I do think that that's a really good ad for them. And then as Monmouth loses a guy, they add a guy, Kavion McClain. He was over at Texas Southern this last season. He was their top scorer, 14 points on about 38% 3-point shooting, just under 4.5 assists, 1.8 steals per game. He's heading on over to Monmouth. And when Monmouth has been very successful, they've had guys like Xander Rice. They've had sort of that takeover score for them. Abdi Bashir this last season was able to put up like 20 points per contest. So they always like to be able to have those go-to guys. And I think that McClain, even though he was over at Texas Southern this last season, a little bit of a lower level, I think they use a chance to be able to go in there and really just command this offense in general, mainly because with Monmouth, they just haven't been able to bring in too much this offseason. Janab Dabul, who comes over from Portland, is really their lone other ad. So they're going to need him to be able to give you quite a bit of production, but I do like what he's able to bring to the table, and I think that this one is going to be interesting as well. Chance Westry just was unable to get out there on the floor for Syracuse this past season, and he's got a long and winding road. Began his career over at Auburn, a guy that I always liked. I know that he was a very highly touted recruit coming out of high school many, many years ago. He's going to be going on over to UAB. What you're going to be able to get out of Westery, that is a little bit TBD because, again, he has dealt with injuries. He's dealt with a lot of things that have popped up off the court, everything like that. But if I'm not mistaken, this was a former top 50 recruit, according to 247 Sports, a guy that at 6'6" is able to light you up from three. Defense left a little bit of something to be desired coming out of high school, but was a really good offensive player. And for UAB, they like those guys. They're able to light you up on the offensive side of things. So I do think that that's an ad that is very much going to be working out for them. Giovanni Amaruju, he last season was over at George Mason and put up some solid numbers, about 6 points per contest, 4 boards. When he was over at Siena 2 seasons ago, was able to show his worth with 6+ rebounds per game. He's decided that he is going to be going to East Carolina. Now for East Carolina, for the love of Pete, they need to add some 3-point shooting because that was really their main kryptonite last season. They were very strong down low. They had absolutely no 3-point shooting whatsoever. And right now they've got Eli Delorier, who comes on over from Providence. He's another guy that's saying 6'10", has some upside down low. So they are really going to need to address that, but once again, East Carolina showing that they are very much committed to being rock solid down low. This is another ad that is going to be able to help them be even more solid down low, so that's something that I think is going to be big for them. This, I think, is going to be a rock solid ad as well. DJ Turn It Up Smith. He has decided that he is going to be going to Mercer. He last season was able to have some nice numbers while he was over at Robert Morris. He averaged about 9 points, a little bit over 3 assists per contest. Is DJ Smith going to be that guy that takes Mercer to the promised land or anything like that? No, he's probably going to be like, if you have a point guard responsibility that is sold out as sort of like a two-headed monster, I think they could be number 2 in that two-headed monster. They're also going to be bringing in Zaire Williams, this Mercer team is, but I do think that this is a relatively solid ad. I do think that DJ Smith is going to be able to give you some nice production. He's a solid 3-point shooter, not an amazing 3-point shooter, but he'll be able to give you a little bit of something from the outside as well, so I do think that he steps in right away. He's going to be able to help out this bunch in Mercer, a Mercer team that, let's call it what it is, they were a little bit hit or miss all season long, and I do think that that is going to be able to fortify things, and we'll see what else Mercer has up their sleeve, because they're going to need to add a little bit more depth for this upcoming season. You've got Jaden Young. He was over at Virginia Tech this past season. He has decided that he is going to be going to North Carolina. It looked like he was going to be going to High Point, but High Point, they've got like 17 different guys already coming in, and for North Carolina, I don't know if they're going to get a ton out of him, as you've got a guy in Young that last season was able to average about 8 points per contest. He had some nice performances towards the back half of the season, but as we know, Virginia Tech was an unmitigated mess, I think is the best way of being able to put it. And if he's seeing meaningful minutes over at North Carolina is not having a season that is going to be going to plan. I'm just going to call it what it is. But that said, they're going to be able to add a little bit of depth with this, with losing some of the guys like Ian Jackson and company. They certainly do need that depth. And for North Carolina, it's going to be very interesting to see how else they're going to be able to fill out this roster, because they've done a nice job bringing in some size in the portal. Henry Vassar coming on over from Arizona is massive. Jerron Stevenson has a nice bit of versatility. They bring in Kion Evans, who I don't think that he's going to see massive minutes, but he helps out that backcourt as well. So that's going to be able to give them a little bit of a booster. Again, I think that this is a little bit more of a, shall we say, depth ad rather than anything else. But still, even just having a little bit of a depth ad, I do think that that is going to be able to give them a little bit of help. This, I think, is going to be of help as well. You've got Sterling Young, who was over at the SWAC level last season over at Florida A&M, and he was very good this last season, and he has decided that he is going to be going to Indiana State. We've noticed a lot of SWAC guys that have went to the state of Indiana over the last few seasons. Some of them have panned out, I'll be honest here, a lot of them have not, but Sterling Young began his career over at Charlotte, just was unable to get out there on the floor for Charlotte, and this past season over at Florida A&M, he was a part of an offense that was one of the most improved in all of college basketball as the season went along, and the number 1 cover team in all of college basketball as well. For Young, 17 points per contest, was able to shoot about 35% from 3-point in conference play. He was averaging closer to 20 points per contest, and he did a lot of that coming off the bench. He only started in 9 games this past season over at Florida A&M. Is he going to need to work on his defense? Absolutely, but you know what? This is a guy that's able to really light you up on offense. For Indiana State, they turned the ball over a ton last season, and you have a guy in Sterling Young that did a nice job in terms of having a solid assist-to-turnover ratio, according to our good friend Rocco Miller over at Bracketeer.org, so I do like that move for them. And you've got Papa Amadou Kante, who has decided that he's going to be returning to Pittsburgh. Was a little bit of an afterthought for them this past season, but a 6'10" big man that should be able to give them a little bit of something, and he just knows the system in general, so that's good. And I do think that it's very important to report upon these guys that are going to be returning to school, like Jadis Jones, who last season he was over at Lindenwood averaged 12.5 points, steal and a half per contest. He at 6'5", was one of the top OVC freshmen out there in the entire conference. He has decided that he's going to be going back to school as well. Lindenwood, all of a sudden, things are not looking so bad for them. As for Lindenwood, I felt like they prematurely made the move up to the Division I level. That was clearly a football move and a football move only. Their last season at the Division II level, they were sub 500, but they've also got Dontrez Williams, who's going to be coming over from Abilene Christian. Guy that at 6'5" is able to do a little bit of everything. Is going to be able to help the defense of a Lindenwood team that's not been great defensively. So I do like these ads for them, and I like this ad as well. You've got a guy that was over at Coastal Carolina this last season in Jordan Battle. He was averaging about 13 points, just under 2 assists per contest, shot over 40% from 3-point. He's heading on over to Old Dominion. What Old Dominion was lacking this past season was 3-point shooting. They were pretty solid on the glass. They had absolutely nothing whatsoever from the outside. Mike Jones, you might be asking who, and I say Coach Mike Jones over at Old Dominion, building a really nice roster. Drew McKenna, he's going to be able to help maintain things down low for this bunch coming on over from Georgetown, where you didn't see a ton of minutes. Casey Shaw was a nice go-to guy and was able to do a little bit of everything at Maryland Eastern Shore this last season, so being able to add him into the fold as well, this means that this team is becoming a little bit more well-rounded, and I think that things are very much on the up and up there. And what else is on the up and up is everything that you're getting on this podcast. If you do like what you're hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Heaps, you're able to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you, for this podcast, you do have one of two ways we fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at @gunit_81. Keep in mind, letters EM, they mean does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. And then from there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. And a big thanks once again to one of our good friends, Tristan Freeman. He does such amazing work over at Butts and Brackets. He joined me in the last segment, and I'm coming at you guys every single day on this podcast, regular season and off season. So I'll be back with you once again tomorrow. Thank you.